debate on motion number 6142 in the name of Liam McArthur on fuel prices. Rob.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's always a delight to take part in debates that reflect particularly the rural and island communities which this is focused upon. And I'm sorry that none of the rural and island members from the Labour Party were here to take part. And I'm not surprised, because their position is entirely untenable. Richard Simpson said on Brian Taylor's Big Blether in Aviemore, just before the conference of the SNP, that the fuel escalator should continue. That's a Central Belt member speaking in the Highlands, telling us that, in fact, the London Government's approach to fuel duty should continue to rise. In other words, the exact opposite of trying to find the solutions which Charlie Gordon has tried to suggest today.
Certainly. Charlie Gordon.
I did point out that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I don't necessarily think that the mitigation that we all claim to seek will necessarily be through changing the fuel duty itself.
Rob Gibson.
Thank you. It sounds to me that Labour are proposing a very scabby cat, if I may say so. I think we need to be actually trying to deal with the 90 island communities in Scotland. Perhaps England's only got about 6 inhabited islands, but we have areas which are severely disadvantaged, and many of them are represented, by people who actually have been seeking solutions to this for a very long while. It's welcome to have converts, as my colleague Maureen Watt said, but I think we have to understand the Chancellor's argument about this a little more. He says in his letter to John Swinney on the 9th of April, "I understand that fuel prices are typically higher than the UK average in remote and rural parts of the country, including the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, but that this is not a result of the fuel duty regime, rather is a product of market forces." Right. My discussion at the Transport Committee has been that if market forces have failed, it's not a question of whether on islands you can have competition between two different petrol stations, because it's the same supplier who takes the fuel to the islands. Now, competition doesn't work, so therefore we have to intervene in some means to make sure that market forces are dealt with. And the question that I've suggested we look at is for bulk buying by local councils in areas like that. And I put this forward in the Highland Council area. John Lang, the councillor in charge of tech services, said it would be too complicated. Well, I'm sorry. It's an idea which people on islands want. Since the Cabinet Secretary is looking for ideas, then I hope that that idea might be looked at, because in certain areas we have to make sure that the local petrol stations and so on are supplied at prices which are competitive. And if there has been a disadvantage of 10 pence in terms of fuel duty, that has not helped as well on top of that. But I think intervening in the market is an important part of this. Now, the committee actually threw out a petition, or closed it, should we say, because the Labour members and the Green convener considered that the wording of it were such that the petition from the Western Isles was closed, because the Cabinet Secretary and the Government had been asked for their responses. Well, I'm sorry to say that that did happen, despite the Liberal member and the 2 SNP members voting against that and keeping the subject live. So if this debate is anything to go by, it's a means to actually find ways to keep the issue alive and to ensure that we have a debate which finds solutions. Now, if there is goodwill, then the first part of that has got to be to look at the regulator. We've had all the arguments about that, but what I would go on to say is this. If we're going to be four square in the argument, then the Liberal Democrat members from the Highlands and Islands in the UK Parliament are going to have to stand on their feet and fight for this. So often, when it comes to a vote, they are not present. Yes, Sir Robert Smith was there. Yes, Alan Reid was there for one of the votes most recently. But where was Charles Kennedy? Where was Viscount Thurso? Where was Alistair Carmichael? Where was Danny Alexander? They were not there to vote in terms of the regulator, and that is precisely the kind of areas where it's important for us to speak with one voice, and the Liberal Democrats do not back us up when it comes to the bit. Their abstentions throughout this sort of approach has not helped, and although we wish to support their motion in principle, we look for a bit more guts from them in future.